Pedro Alonso López was born on October 8, 1948, in Santa Isabel, Colombia. His birthplace was a small town rife with poverty and crime. His mother, Benilda López de Castañeda, was a prostitute. Pedro's father, Medardo Reyes, was murdered 6 months before Pedro was born. At the age of 8, Pedro was expelled from home for attempting to molest his younger sister. Left to fend for himself on the streets, Pedro fell into a life of petty crime. He was soon picked up by a man who offered him food and shelter, only to rape him later. This traumatic experience would shape Pedro's future actions in unimaginable ways. He then joined a gang of street children, and his life continued its downward spiral. Despite these hardships, Pedro was not without talents. His early experiences of abuse and violence planted the seeds for his future atrocities. Pedro López's adolescence was marked by increasing criminal activity. By his teenage years, he was already a seasoned thief. His first major crime was stealing a car, which landed him in prison. In prison, he was gang-raped by fellow inmates. Seeking revenge, he crafted a shiv and killed 3 of his assailants. This act of violence gave him a taste for blood. After his release, Pedro drifted through Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. It was during this time that his crimes took on a more sinister nature. He began to target young girls, luring them with promises of gifts or money. The shift from theft to murder was gradual but inevitable. His desire for control and power over his victims grew stronger with each crime. Pedro used his charm and intelligence to deceive his victims. He would often pose as a lost traveler or a kind stranger, gaining the trust of his unsuspecting prey. His methods became more refined and his confidence grew. The transient nature of his lifestyle and the marginalized status of his victims meant that his actions did not attract immediate attention. Pedro López's crimes were nothing short of monstrous. He targeted young girls between the ages of 8 and 12, abducting them from marketplaces or secluded areas. Once he had them in his grasp, he would take them to isolated locations. His method was chillingly consistent. He would rape and strangle his victims, often burying their bodies in shallow graves. The sheer number of his victims is staggering. López confessed to murdering over 300 girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. His horrific acts earned him the nickname, the Monster of the Andes. The brutality of his crimes shocked even seasoned investigators. He showed no remorse, often describing his actions with a chilling detachment. Pedro's reign of terror lasted for several years. He would often return to the graves of his victims to relive the moments of his crimes. His ability to evade capture for so long is a testament to his cunning and the failures of the law enforcement systems in the countries he terrorized. The impact of his crimes on the families of his victims was devastating. The scale of Pedro López's crimes is almost unimaginable. His modus operandi allowed him to strike repeatedly without raising immediate suspicion. He operated across 3 countries, making it difficult for authorities to connect the dots. His victims were often poor, indigenous girls whose disappearances were not always thoroughly investigated. López's ability to blend into different communities helped him evade capture. He would often move to new areas after committing a series of murders, staying one step ahead of the law. This constant movement made it challenging for investigators to track him down. The total number of his victims is still a matter of debate. While López confessed to over 300 murders, some experts believe the true number could be even higher. The remote locations of many of the crime scenes mean that not all bodies were recovered. Each victim represents a life cut tragically short, a family left in agony. The investigation into Pedro López's crimes was fraught with challenges. The first breakthrough came in 1980 when López attempted to abduct a girl in Ambato, Ecuador. He was caught in the act by local villagers and handed over to the police. Initially, the authorities did not realize the magnitude of the criminal they had in custody. During interrogation, López began to confess to his crimes. His detailed accounts and the locations of the bodies he described stunned the investigators. They initially doubted his claims, but a series of grisly discoveries soon confirmed his confessions. The recovery of multiple bodies from the locations he indicated left no doubt about his guilt. The collaborative efforts of law enforcement agencies from Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru were instrumental in piecing together the full extent of López's atrocities. His capture was a significant victory, but it came too late for hundreds of victims. The legal proceedings that followed were complex. Pedro López's current status is a topic of much controversy and concern. After serving 14 years of his 16-year sentence in Ecuador, he was released in 1994 for good behavior. He was then deported to Colombia, where he was briefly held in a psychiatric facility. In 1998, López was declared sane and released on a $50 bail. His whereabouts have been largely unknown since then. There have been occasional reports of sightings and rumors about his activities. Some believe he may have resumed his murderous ways, while others think he is living a quiet life under an assumed identity. The lack of definitive information has left many uneasy, especially the families of his victims. Many argue that he should never have been allowed back into society. His case has sparked debates about the nature of punishment and rehabilitation for serial offenders. The current status of Pedro López remains a chilling reminder of the potential for evil to evade justice. The legacy of Pedro López's crimes is one of horror and heartbreak. The families of his victims continue to grapple with their loss, their lives forever altered by his brutal actions. The communities he targeted are haunted by the memories of their missing children, and the scars of his crimes remain fresh even decades later. López's case has had a profound impact on law enforcement practices in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. It highlighted the need for better coordination and communication between agencies across borders. The lessons learned from his case have led to improvements in how serial crimes are investigated and prosecuted. His story has also entered the realm of popular culture, serving as a grim, cautionary tale. Documentaries, books, and articles have been produced to keep the memory of his victims alive and to remind society of the lurking dangers of such predators. The monster of the Andes has become a symbol of the worst humanity can offer. His legacy is a somber reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of justice.